And now it's time for our children's moment. This is our kids' lesson. Now for our lesson this week, we're going to talk about something that we're going to continue talking about over the next couple of weeks. It's kind of a big thing. We're going to talk about fear, about what it feels like to be afraid and what we should do with that and what God has to say about it. Have you ever been afraid of something? Fear is kind of like a feeling. What does it feel like when you're afraid or when you're feeling fear? There are lots of things that can cause us to be afraid, even grown-ups. No matter how old we are, there are lots of things that can cause fear to come into our heart. God tells us in the Bible, do not fear. He says it again and again in the Bible. God tells us, do not fear. Do not be afraid. Do not let your hearts be troubled. Do not worry. God must say it a lot because it's important. It reminds me of a story in the Bible when Jesus was with his friends and Jesus got to teach his friends this very lesson about not being afraid. Let's read it from the Jesus Storybook Bible, published by Zondervan Kids. The Captain of the Storm. This is from Mark chapter 4. The sun was going down, the air was warm and still. Let's go across the lake, Jesus said to his friends. Jesus had been helping people all day, and now he was tired. So they left the crowds at the shore and set out in a small fishing boat. Jesus climbed into the boat to take a nap. As soon as his head touched the pillow, he fell fast asleep. It was a beautiful evening. A gentle breeze rustled the sails. The friends were chatting happily as they headed out into the middle of the lake. Everything was perfect, just right for a nice, quiet sail. They were only about halfway across when, out of nowhere, whirling winds swept across the lake, fierce and strong, like a hurricane. A blinding flash of lightning lit up the sky. Thunder roared right overhead. The storm blew the water into towering waves that hurled the little boat up, 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 and then sent it hurtling, crashing back down, down, down. The fishing boat was blown and buffeted and tossed and turned back and forth and up and down and left and right and round and round. And in the middle of the storm, Jesus was sleeping. Now, Jesus' friends had been fishermen all their lives, but in all their years of fishing on this lake, they had never once seen a storm like this one. No matter how hard they struggled with their ropes and sails, they couldn't control their boat. This storm was too big for them. But the storm wasn't too big for Jesus. "Help!" they screamed. "Wake up! Quick, Jesus!" Jesus opened his eyes. "Rescue us! Save us!" they shrieked. "Don't you care?" Of course, Jesus cared, and this was the very reason he had come, to rescue them and to save them. Jesus stood up and spoke to the storm. "Hush," he said. That's all. And the strangest thing happened. The wind and the waves recognized Jesus' voice. They had heard it before, of course. It was the same voice that made them in the very beginning. They listened to Jesus, and they did what he said. Immediately, the wind stopped. The water calmed down. It glittered innocently in the moonlight and lapped quietly against the side of the boat as if nothing had happened. The little boat bobbed gently up and down. There was a deep stillness and great quiet all around. Then Jesus turned to his wind-torn friends. "Why were you scared?" he asked. "Did you forget who I am? Did you believe your fears instead of me?" Jesus' friends were quiet. Jesus is telling his friends not to be afraid, no matter what comes. Now, how would you feel if you were on that boat in the middle of the big storm? How would you feel? I know I would probably feel pretty afraid. I would probably be listening to that voice of fear, that voice that's telling me, "Oh no, the storm's gonna get us," or "There's no way out. You're not gonna be able to save yourself." But Jesus told his friends, "You need to listen to my voice. You need to listen to the voice of faith. There are times in our life whenever we sometimes listen to the voice of fear instead of the voice of faith. See, sometimes fear can speak messages into our life, like this one. Sometimes fear can tell us, no one likes you. It can make you feel afraid or worried, and you listen to that voice that tells you, nobody likes you. But what does faith have to say about it? Well, faith tells us that God loves me. For God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son. John 3:16. Well, what about when fear tells us another message, like, you are alone? Sometimes we can feel that way. When things are going wrong, we can feel very alone. And fear can creep into our heart, and we start to hear that message that we're all alone. But what does faith have to say about that? Faith says, God is always with me. Deuteronomy 31:8 says, never will he leave you nor forsake you. Do not be afraid. But what about when fear says, you're not good enough? We hear that message and sometimes we can start to believe it. But what does faith have to say about it? Faith says, I can do all things through Christ. He gives me strength. Philippians 4:13. So this week, boys and girls, I want you to start listening for that voice of faith. When you feel those messages of fear, those messages that tell you you're not good enough, you're never going to make it, you can't handle this, this is going to be too scary, I want you to think, well, what would faith say? And listen to that voice. Have a great week. I'll see you again soon.